I knew something was wrong the moment the music stopped. Not slowly, not gently. It cut off like someone had pulled a knife through the air. The guests froze. Crystal glasses hovered mid-air. Conversations died in people's throats. Every eye turned toward the altar, toward me. I was standing there in a white dress that didn't feel like mine. The man beside me didn't reach for my hand. Alexander Knox stood tall, dark, perfectly still. The most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast. A man people feared without knowing his name. A man who ruled through silence, not noise. And he didn't look at me. Not once. His jaw was locked. His eyes were fixed somewhere beyond the crowd, as if this wedding was just another transaction he needed to survive. I swallowed hard. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to marry my sister. Everyone knew that. The invitations had her name on them first. The rumors whispered her beauty, her fire, her boldness. She was the one Alexander Knox wanted, the one he had noticed, the one he had asked about. Not me. I was the quiet one, the backup, the girl who stayed out of sight and never caused trouble. Yet here I was, standing at the altar, married to the most dangerous man in the room. The officiant spoke, but his voice sounded far away, like I was underwater. My heart pounded, so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. I glanced sideways, hoping, foolishly, that Alexander would meet my eyes. He didn't. When it was time to say his vows, he spoke only 2 words. I do. No emotion, no hesitation. Just certainty. When it was my turn, my voice almost failed me. I do. That's when it happened. Alexander finally turned his head. For half a second his eyes met mine. And in that moment I didn't see love. I didn't even see coldness. I saw calculation, like he was measuring the damage and deciding it was worth it. A shiver crawled down my spine. The ring slid onto my finger, heavy, cold, permanent. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. People smiled. But I felt like I had just stepped into a cage made of gold and shadows. As we turned to walk back down the aisle, Alexander leaned in close enough that only I could hear him. Stay close, he said quietly. Not a request. A warning. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The doors of the cathedral opened, and night swallowed us whole. Outside, black SUVs lined the street like silent guards. Men in dark suits scanned rooftops, hands near their weapons. This wasn't a celebration. It was a battlefield dressed as a wedding. As Alexander guided me into the car, his grip was firm. Not rough, not gentle. Protective. Possessive, confusing. The car door shut with a heavy thud. The world outside disappeared. I turned to him, finally finding the courage to ask the question burning inside me. Why me? For a long moment he didn't answer. The car started moving. City lights blurred past the window like fleeing thoughts. Then Alexander spoke, his voice low and steady. Because letting you go, he said, eyes forward, wasn't an option. My breath caught. That wasn't an answer. That was a sentence with a hidden threat. As the city disappeared behind us, one truth settled deep in my chest. He didn't marry me because he loved me. He married me because something far more dangerous was coming. And somehow, I was right at the center of it. The car was silent except for the hum of the engine. Outside, the city lights painted fleeting, stripes across my face, but inside, there was only shadow. Alexander Knox didn't look at me. Not once. His hands rested on the steering wheel, knuckles white. Calm, controlled, lethal. I tried to make sense of it. My sister. She should be the one sitting here, protected by this man, worshipped by the very people who would kill to be in his favor. Instead, it was me. Scarlet. The quiet one, the invisible one, the backup. Somehow fate, or whatever cruel twist of destiny this was, had put me here, in the lion's den as the prize. I swallowed hard. My fingers dug into the leather of the seat. I wanted to speak, to demand, answers to scream. But even my own thoughts seemed too small for the enormity of the situation. I had just married a mafia boss. A man who could decide life or death for hundreds. A man whose smile could destroy or seduce with equal force. And he didn't even want me. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and monumental, every corner illuminated by sharp spotlights. It was more fortress than home. Guards in black suits flanked the gates. A river of expensive cars streamed into the driveway, each engine a warning, a growl in the night. Realized then that nothing about this life was ordinary. And I wasn't ordinary either. At least not anymore. Alexander didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every detail of his presence communicated the rules. Watch, obey, survive. When we entered the grand hallway, chandeliers cast fractured light on marble floors so polished they reflected his image in a ghostly double. I couldn't look away from the sharpness of his profile, the way he carried power without effort, how men and women alike seemed to shrink slightly when he passed. This wasn't a man who loved. This was a man who dominated, and I was trapped in his orbit. A servant guided me to my room, opulent and cold, every surface polished to perfection. There was no warmth here, only order, only control. A room that reminded me I wasn't at home. I was in his world. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to steady my racing heart. What had my sister done, or not done, that I was here instead? I couldn't piece it together. Footsteps approached, heavy, measured. Alexander appeared in the doorway, black suit, tailored to perfection, hair slicked back, eyes sharp and unreadable. For a fraction of a second, our eyes met, and I saw it, the calculation, the assessment, the evaluation of risk. And then he turned, as if dismissing me entirely. "Stay where I can see you," he said, and his voice was smooth, but it carried steel beneath it. Not a request, not a suggestion, a command. I nodded. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to beg him to look at me differently, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a marriage. Not really. This wasn't a cage, a fortress. And I was the prize inside, trapped, observed, measured. And yet, a part of me understood the unspoken truth. I was here for a reason. Something dangerous was coming. Something that had nothing to do with love, and everything to do with survival. My sister, the one he truly wanted, would have been in more danger than I could ever imagine. A shadow passed outside the window, a reminder that the world beyond these walls was as lethal as the man sitting across from me. Every heartbeat was a countdown, every breath a gamble. And as I realized this, the first true tremor of fear crept through me. Alexander Knox hadn't married me because he loved me. He had married me because he had to. And whatever storm was approaching, I was now right in the eye of it. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The mansion breathed around me. Every corner held secrets. Every hallway whispered of control, danger, and power I couldn't yet comprehend. I had been inside for barely an hour, but the place already felt alive, like it had its own pulse. And at the center of it, Alexander Knox moved with a predator's certainty, surveying his domain, knowing every shadow, every hidden angle, every silent threat before it even existed. I followed him, keeping my eyes low. My white dress still felt wrong, out of place in the darkness and the cold. Guards lined the walls at intervals I couldn't count. Their eyes followed Alexander, not me, yet I knew they would react if he even flicked his finger. The mansion was a fortress. Yes, but it was also a stage, and I was learning the role I was forced to play, the silent, observant and cautious wife. He stopped in the grand study. Books lined the walls, but this wasn't a place for reading. It was for strategy. Blueprints of the city, maps of territories, and photographs of people he had marked as threats sat on the desk. Every piece of paper seemed like a puzzle piece in a dangerous game I didn't know I had been thrown into. Alexander ran a hand over them, fingers brushing lightly, almost affectionately, as if he could touch control itself. "Sit," he said, voice low, unyielding. No explanation. I obeyed. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. The face of a man who had everything and feared nothing. A jawline set in stone. Eyes so dark they seemed to swallow the room. A presence so commanding it felt like the walls themselves leaned toward him. I wanted to study him, understand him, but I also wanted to run. And deep down, I knew running wasn't an option, not now. He didn't speak again immediately. Instead, he pulled a chair beside mine, a subtle gesture of proximity, yet without comfort. Every movement was precise, deliberate. He handled danger like breathing. Every threat, every rival, every betrayal he had already anticipated. And now, somehow I was woven into his calculations. I tried to make sense of it all. How did I, a girl no one noticed, end up here? And why had fate, or maybe Alexander himself, chosen me? I remembered the wedding, the way he had spoken just 2 words. I do. The weight behind them still pressed against my chest. Those words weren't spoken lightly. They weren't about love. They were about strategy, about survival, about control, about protecting someone who didn't even belong in this world. A sudden noise outside shattered my thoughts. A door slammed. Footsteps echoed in the hall. Guards moved like shadows, silent and fast. Alexander's hand went to the small pistol at his side, just a subtle flick, enough to signal he was ready. Ready for what? I didn't know. But I saw how effortlessly he could react, how perfectly he could dominate a space without raising his voice. This man was lethal, and I had just stepped into his world. He glanced at me, almost as if measuring me, weighing my awareness, testing my instinct. "Stay alert," he said. Not a warning, an order. I nodded, heart hammering. Every nerve in my body screamed caution. Every instinct screamed fear. Yet something in me couldn't look away from him. Not fully. Because even though I wasn't wanted, even though I was merely a replacement in his eyes, I felt dangerously seen. Not for who I was, but for the value I carried. And that value was survival. The night stretched on, each hour revealing new rules I didn't know existed. Alexander moved, like a shadow, silent, precise. I followed, watching, learning, trying to anticipate threats I couldn't yet understand. I realized then that in this house, in his orbit, nothing was random. Every glance, every movement, every word, even silence was calculated. And somehow, impossibly, I had become part of that calculation. As I lay in my room later, staring at the ceiling, I understood one terrifying truth. I was not married to Alexander Knox for love. I was married for protection. From what, I didn't yet know. But I knew this. I was in the middle of a storm, and he was the eye. And surviving this, would take everything I had. The room was quiet. Too quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silk sheet slipping beneath me. My fingers traced the pattern, on the blanket. But I wasn't thinking about comfort. I was thinking about him. Alexander Knox. The man I was now married to. The man whose eyes could cut through a room and make everyone freeze. The man who didn't even want me but had me anyway. The windows were open slightly, letting in a cold night breeze. Outside, the city buzzed with life, but in here, life felt suspended. The shadows in the corners seemed alive, as if they were waiting, breathing, watching. Every creak in the floorboards made my stomach tighten. Every rustle of the curtains made me flinch. I realized something terrifying. I was alone in a mansion designed for hundreds, and yet I had never felt more watched. Guards patrolled the halls, but they weren't the ones making me uneasy. It was him. Alexander Knox. I could feel him everywhere, even when he wasn't. His presence was like gravity, inescapable, oppressive, and commanding. I remembered his words from earlier. The simple sentence that carried weight I couldn't yet measure. Stay where I can see you. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't protection offered out of kindness. It was a rule, a condition, a line drawn in the sand. And somehow I was already on the wrong side of it. Just by existing, I tried to focus on something else. Anything else. My sister, laughing at the wedding reception, seemed light years away. My life before tonight felt like a different universe entirely. I had never Imagined I'd be married to a man who could destroy people with a thought, a gesture, or a single word. Yet here I was. And worse, I knew I couldn't escape. Not now. Not ever. A sudden knock at the door made me jump. My heart raced. I wasn't ready for visitors. Not yet. The door cracked open, and a servant entered quietly, bowing slightly. They handed me a tray, with food, but I barely noticed it. My thoughts were elsewhere. I kept thinking about him, about Alexander, about the way he moved through the house, silent, commanding, untouchable. How did someone like him even function in the world of ordinary people? How could I possibly navigate this strange, dangerous life without being swallowed by it? Then it hit me. This wasn't just about power. This wasn't just about fear. This was about control. Every action, every glance, every word, even silence was calculated. And I was now part of that calculation. My presence had a purpose. My survival had a price. And I didn't even know what that price was yet. The night stretched on. Shadows lengthened. The wind outside whispered through the open window. And I realized that in this mansion, alone, surrounded by danger and power I couldn't yet grasp, I was learning a hard truth. I wasn't just married to Alexander Knox. I was under his protection, whether I wanted it or not. And protection in his world was never gentle. It was never safe. I lay back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling. My heart slowed slightly, but the fear didn't leave. It never would. Not fully, because I was no longer just Scarlett, the quiet girl. I was Scarlett, the girl who had married a Mafia boss, the girl who was trapped in a world of power, danger, and secrets. The girl who didn't yet understand that surviving Alexander Knox meant surviving herself. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, the mansion slept. But I didn't. I was awake to every sound, every shadow, every breath. I was awake to the danger that had just begun. And deep down, I knew one terrifying truth. Tonight was only the beginning. The night was far from over. The mansion's walls weren't just stone. They were alive. Shadows stretched and twisted across the marble floors, each corner hiding possibilities I didn't want to imagine. I hadn't even made it through the first hour of real danger, and already my heart raced like a trapped animal. Then I heard it. A low rumble outside. Not a car. Not the wind. Something heavier. Something moving with intent. Alexander's head snapped up. His eyes, dark and sharp as a blade, scanned the room. Every muscle in his body tightened, ready to strike. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The energy in the air changed instantly. Guards moved to positions I hadn't even noticed before. The mansion was no longer just a home. It was a fortress, and I was trapped in its center. The front door exploded inward with a sound that made my ears ring. Wood splintered. The smell of smoke hit me first. Then came the shouts. Men in dark clothing stormed inside, weapons drawn. I froze. My mind screamed to run, but my body didn't move. My legs felt like lead. Alexander moved like lightning. He was everywhere at once. One moment he was in front of me, blocking my path. The next, a fist connected with a man's jaw, sending him flying across the hallway. Another man came at him from the stairs, but Alexander caught him mid-step, twisted his arm, and tossed him into a table. Glass shattered. A chandelier wobbled dangerously overhead, and all the while, I stayed frozen in place, terrified, awestruck, confused. He turned to me once, just for a split second. That brief glance said everything. "Stay behind me," he ordered, voice calm but lethal. I nodded, clinging to the wall as he moved. Every movement he made was precise, every strike calculated. There was no hesitation. No mercy, only survival, and his version of protection. Brutal, absolute, and terrifying. A man lunged toward me from the shadows. I screamed. Alexander's hand shot out like a snake striking. The man crumpled to the floor, groaning. Alexander's eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw concern. But it was gone, replaced by cold, controlled dominance. The fight didn't last long. Too few attackers, too much power. They fled through the broken doors, leaving the mansion in chaos. Glass crunched beneath my feet as I followed Alexander, my fingers gripping the edge of his coat. When it was over, he didn't speak. He just moved through the debris, checking the perimeter, every gesture precise. And then he stopped, looked at me. "You're safe," he said quietly. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to shout, but all I could do was nod. I was trembling. My body had betrayed me. My heart still raced a mile a minute. I had survived the first attack, but I knew it was only the beginning. Alexander Knox hadn't married me for love. He had married me for survival, and now I understood exactly what that meant. He hadn't just protected me from strangers. He had reminded everyone, that I wasn't a victim, that I wasn't his sister, that I wasn't anyone's mistake. I was Scarlet, and I was under his protection. Brutal, unrelenting, merciless protection. As we walked back toward the main hall, the mansion still trembling from the chaos, I realized something else. Fear wasn't the only thing I felt. My pulse had slowed slightly, and my mind was sharp. Every instinct, every sense, every thought was alive. I was noticing things I hadn't before. The way he moved, the way he calculated, the way he could control a room without raising his voice. Danger, I realized, wasn't just outside. Danger was here. Danger was Alexander Knox. And somehow I knew I was already addicted to it. The aftermath of the attack left the mansion quiet. Too quiet. I could still hear the echo of broken glass in the hallways, the faint scent of smoke lingering in the air, and the way every shadow seemed to stretch just a little too long. I stayed close to Alexander, though not touching him. My instincts screamed to stay safe, to stay out of the way. But something about him drew my gaze, like a magnet I couldn't resist. He moved through the hall with the same calm precision as before. Hands on guns, checking. Corners, scanning windows. Every motion deliberate. Every glance measured. And every now and then, his dark eyes flicked to me, just long enough to remind me that he saw me. But not really. Not in the way anyone should see a person. I was part of the battlefield now, an asset, a responsibility. And somehow, that terrified me more than the attack itself. I tried to catch my breath. My chest still hurt from the adrenaline. My hands trembled slightly. And yet, despite every rational thought screaming at me to run, I couldn't look away from him. There was something magnetic about the way he carried danger. It wasn't just power. It was precision, control, certainty. A man who could destroy anything in a second, but chose not to. Not always. He approached me, checking a window shutter, then a door, then the perimeter once more. The briefest flick of a movement, and I realized he had blood on his hands. Someone's blood, not his own. I shivered. My instinct was to recoil, but something inside me held me there. Frozen, observing, learning. "You saw too much," he said suddenly, voice low, measured. No anger, no warning, just observation. I blinked. I didn't. He cut me off with a shake of his head. "You think you're safe now, you're not." I swallowed hard. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit. I was afraid. Of him. Of the world he lived in. Of the invisible enemies I couldn't see. But part of me felt safer with him than I ever had anywhere else. Confusing, terrifying, impossible to name. The mansion had always felt like a fortress, but now it felt like a cage. And Alexander Knox was the key and the lock. I wanted answers. I wanted him to explain, to soften, to reassure me. But I knew already he wouldn't. His way of showing care was different, brutal, unforgiving, calculated. And yet, in some strange, twisted way, it was protection. It was survival. It was life. I followed him as he moved to the main hall, my eyes catching the faint marks on the floor, where the attackers had been thrown down. I noticed the way his suit remained untouched by the chaos, immaculate, perfect. I noticed the way his fingers flexed slightly, almost, unconsciously, as if he could strike at any moment. Why? I whispered finally, barely audible. Why protect me? His gaze landed on me for the first time in a way that lingered longer than before. Not affection. Not tenderness. Something harder, darker, and infinitely more dangerous. Because letting you go would have been a mistake, he said. Voice low, final. No room for argument. My mind froze. A mistake? That word rolled over me like thunder. I wanted to protest, to cry, fight, but I couldn't. He wasn't offering choices. He was stating fact. The world had already decided, and I was trapped in the middle of it. I wanted to hate him for it. I wanted to scream, to push, to refuse. But the truth burned through me like fire. I had no choice. He was right. The fear that had driven me to the edge earlier now twisted into something else. Something more complicated, more confusing. I felt gratitude, terrifying, guilty, and wrong. And yet it was there. Alexander Knox didn't just save me from the attackers. He saved me from a fate I couldn't even imagine. And in doing so, he reminded me of something I hadn't realized yet. In this world of shadows and danger, survival was a gift, and he held it in his hands. I stayed close, my heart hammering, my mind racing. And for the first time, I understood the cruelest truth of all. I wasn't just married to Alexander Knox. I was a part of his life, whether I wanted it or not, and there was no turning back. The morning light didn't bring relief. It brought clarity. I sat by the window, the mansion silent except for the soft hum of the city below. The previous night's chaos played over and over in my mind, like a film I couldn't pause. I couldn't stop thinking about the attack, the way Alexander had moved, the way his presence had dominated every corner of the house, and the realization that I was chosen. Not for love, not for comfort, not even for companionship. I was chosen to survive. It hit me in a sudden, terrible rush. The attackers, the men who had tried to storm the mansion, they weren't there for my sister. They hadn't been mistaken. They hadn't gotten the wrong address. They had come for me. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place at once. The whispers about the family feud, the tension I hadn't understood, the constant, unspoken threat in Alexander's eyes. I had assumed I was in the way, a backup bride, an inconvenient pawn. But the truth was far darker, far more deliberate. And that meant I was important. I tried to steady my hands. The cold cup of coffee in front of me did nothing. My mind raced. My body shook. I had been so focused on my sister, the one Alexander wanted, that I hadn't seen the real danger. I hadn't realized how deep this went, how personal it was. And then I saw him, Alexander. Entering the room, calm, unhurried like a storm that had already passed and left only its aftermath. His eyes locked on mine, and for a second the dangerous, untouchable mask he always wore slipped. Not completely. Just enough for me to see the weight behind it. You understand now, he said quietly, almost conversationally, as if discussing the weather instead of life and death. I nodded, unable to speak. My chest felt tight, my mind still spinning. Yes, I whispered finally. I understand. Good, he said. No comfort in the word, only certainty. Because this isn't about your sister. Anymore. Never was. You are the target. You are the reason everything else exists. I stared at him, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air. He hadn't married me for desire. He hadn't married me to punish my sister. He hadn't married me for any reason I could have imagined. He had married me to protect me. and that protection came at a cost I hadn't understood. "Why?" I asked, voice trembling. "Why me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved closer, measured steps. His shadow stretched across the floor, dark and formidable, swallowing me in its presence. "Because," he said finally, "letting you face them without me would have been fatal." My stomach lurched. I wanted to protest. I wanted to scream that I could handle it, but I knew it. Wasn't true. I wasn't ready. I wasn't equipped. And somehow, seeing him like this, calm, controlled, every movement lethal, I realized I had never been safer in my life, and yet never more afraid. The twist of fate was cruel. The man I hated, the man I feared, the man who had taken my life and placed me in his hands. He had done it to save me. And deep down, I felt something I didn't want to admit. Relief, gratitude, confusion. A dangerous mix that churned in my chest and made me feel like I had no control at all. Alexander Knox wasn't just a husband I hadn't wanted. He was the eye of the storm I had been, running for my entire life. And somehow, impossibly, he was the only reason I had survived it. I looked at him. His expression was unreadable, but I could see the faintest tension around his jaw, the smallest crease between his brows. He was always prepared, always vigilant, always deadly. And now I understood why, because the danger wasn't over, not even close. The mansion had settled back into a tense silence. The echoes of the previous night still lingered in every corner. Shattered glass, scuffed floors, and the faint scent of smoke that refused to disappear. But even in the quiet, I could feel the pulse of danger, the invisible lines Alexander had drawn across the property, the walls, and even across me. He moved like a shadow through the corridors, checking locks, scanning windows, calculating threats no one else could see. But something was different tonight. He didn't move with the usual cold precision. There was a slight hesitation, a brief flicker of tension in his shoulders, a shadow behind the mask he always wore. I noticed it immediately, even though I tried not to. My heart skipped. I had spent so long fearing him, hating him, resenting him. And now, I was noticing the cracks in the armor. He didn't speak for a long time, just moved around the room, placing guns in their holders, straightening chairs, adjusting lighting. Every action was deliberate, perfect. But each step seemed heavier, burdened with something unsaid. Finally, he stopped near the fireplace. The flames flickered across his face, casting shadows that softened the harsh lines of his jaw, just slightly. He seemed human, vulnerable, and it hit me in a way I hadn't anticipated. Fear for him. Not fear of him. Fear for him. My chest tightened. I didn't understand why. He had spent hours striking down men who threatened me, protecting me brutally, mercilessly. And yet now, seeing him like this, I felt an unfamiliar pull. My instincts screamed caution. My heart said something else, something dangerous. I stepped closer, hesitantly. He didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. I could feel the weight of his presence pressing down, suffocating and magnetic at the same time. I wanted to speak, to ask the questions that burned in my mind. Why? How? When did this happen? But my voice caught. He finally spoke, low, almost a whisper. "They're coming back." I froze. My stomach dropped. My pulse spiked. And then he added, almost as an afterthought, "And this time I won't let anything happen." I swallowed hard, feeling something stir inside me, a mix of fear, relief, and admiration. Dangerous, foolish admiration. For the first time, I saw a man who was not invincible. Not because he could be harmed easily, but because he carried a weight no one else could understand. He bore the world's threats on his shoulders. Every life he had to protect. Every enemy he had to anticipate. Every wrong he had to correct. It all rested on him. And somehow he had chosen to protect me. I felt a strange pull toward him, drawn by something I couldn't name. His danger, his power, and now, his vulnerability. All at once, terrifying and magnetic. I hated that I noticed it. I hated that it mattered, but it did. I took a cautious step forward. "Alexander," I began, voice trembling. Why me?" He didn't answer immediately. He just turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing, shadows flickering across his face. And then, just for a heartbeat, he looked at me, not as a replacement, not as a pawn, not as someone to protect, but as someone real. "You're here because you had to be," he said finally, "and because I can't lose you." The words hit me like a strike I didn't see coming. Confusion, fear, and something I wasn't ready to name churned in my chest. Alexander Knox. The man I had feared, the man I had despised, the man who had upended my life, had just admitted. He cared. In his own brutal, controlled way, he cared, and I felt it too. The pull, the fascination, the dangerous, impossible curiosity that made my chest tighten and my thoughts scatter. The fire crackled, shadows danced on the walls, and I realized I had stepped deeper into his world than I had ever intended. And somehow, I didn't want to step back, because Alexander Knox was dangerous. And the truth was, so was I. The mansion felt alive in a way I had never noticed before. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of light, every shadow felt like it was moving with intent. I couldn't tell if it was the aftermath of the attacks or Alexander's presence, but the weight in the air was suffocating. I followed him through the grand hallway. He didn't speak, didn't glance at me, yet I could feel his awareness like a magnet pulling me closer, pushing me into his orbit. My chest tightened. With every step, fear, confusion, fascination, all tangled together. We reached the private study, the room where decisions were made, where plans were drawn, where Alexander Knox ruled like a god among mortals. Papers, maps, and photographs were scattered across the desk, remnants of strategies and enemies. He moved to the center, hands clasped behind his back, staring at nothing. I hesitated, my voice caught in my throat. "Alexander, I need to know, about my sister, about everything." He turned slowly, eyes locking on mine. Dark, unyielding, unreadable. And then, finally, he spoke. His voice low, measured, carrying the weight of truths I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. "Your sister would have died in a week," he said. I froze. My stomach dropped. My heart raced faster than it had since the night of the attack. "What?" I whispered. He didn't soften. He didn't pause. He didn't flinch. "The attack. It was always meant for you. Not her. Not anyone else. You were the target. You are the reason everything escalated. Everything that happened because of you." My knees felt weak. The world tilted. All the assumptions I had carried, all the relief I had felt, crashed into jagged shards of fear and disbelief. I had thought I was a mistake, a replacement, a backup bride, but the truth was far more terrifying. I had been chosen, targeted, protected. "You married me to protect me?" I breathed, barely audible. "Yes," he said, simple and final. No warmth, no apology, just fact, survival, control, power. I looked at him, trying to reconcile the man I feared, hated, and yet, strangely admired, with the revelation that my life depended on his brutal choice. The weight of it pressed down on me. I realized I wasn't just his wife. I was his responsibility, his reason, his liability. A wave of emotion hit me. Anger, confusion, fear, all crashing together. I wanted to scream at him for making me a pawn, for pulling me into this world of danger and blood. But I couldn't, because despite everything, he had saved me, brutally, relentlessly, without question. "You think I don't know?" he asked suddenly, his voice sharp now, cutting through my spiraling thoughts. "You think I don't see the fear, the hesitation, the curiosity in your eyes. You were never second choice. You were never disposable. You are necessary. I wanted to argue. I wanted to fight him, push back against the truth, deny the pull that had been growing in me for days. But I couldn't. I felt it. Danger, fascination, attraction, fear, all mixed into something raw, uncontainable, and terrifyingly beautiful. Alexander stepped closer. His shadow stretched over me, dark and powerful. "Do you understand now?" he asked, voice low, commanding. "Do you understand why letting you face this world alone would have been fatal?" I nodded, though my throat was tight. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Yes," I whispered, I understand." The firelight flickered across his face. Shadows softened the edges of his jaw just enough to make him human in a way I had never seen. But the power, the danger, the threat remained, always. And I realized something terrifying. I was no longer just scared of the world. I was scared of losing him. And perhaps, in some way I wasn't ready to name, I was beginning to care. The mansion felt alive with danger again, though the night was silent. Too silent. Every shadow seemed to tremble, every light flicker like a warning. I followed Alexander through the hallways, trying to keep pace, trying to make sense of everything I had just learned. My pulse was wild. My heart hammered not just from fear, but from a strange, unnameable pull. I was scared of him. I was fascinated by him. And now, I was beginning to see why. He stopped in front of a large window, looking out at the city below. The skyline stretched, endlessly. A glittering battlefield that I didn't understand. Alexander didn't glance at me, but I could feel the weight of his attention, the invisible tether that held me close even when he seemed distant. "They'll come back," he said finally, voice low and measured. "And next time, it won't be a warning." I shivered. My hands tightened around my coat. I can help," I whispered. "I can stay out of the way, but..." He cut me off with a glance so sharp I flinched. "You're not out of the way. You're the reason this happens. You're the reason I act. The moment you step into this world, you're part of it." My stomach dropped. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to run. But another, more dangerous part of me, the part that had been quietly observing, quietly fascinated, stayed, frozen in place, waiting for him to explain. He finally turned to me, his eyes dark, unyielding. But now, there was something else. A flicker of raw emotion. Concern, maybe. Or care. Something I had never dared to imagine. "You have to understand," he said quietly. "I married you because it was the only way to save you, not her. You survival first. Everything else comes second." My throat closed. I wanted to hate him for taking my life, for pulling me into this world I wasn't ready for. But I couldn't. Because he was right. And because somewhere deep down I felt a strange, dangerous gratitude. I stepped closer. "But do you care? For me?" I asked, voice trembling. He froze, his jaw tightening. Then, after a long pause, he said, "I didn't choose you for love. But I can't risk losing you. Not now. Not ever." The words were strange. Not tender. Not warm. Brutal and cold in delivery. But beneath the surface, I felt it. The pull. The unspoken bond forming in the cracks of fear and survival. I realized then that love in his world wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. It was survival. It was protection. And it was brutal. And somehow that was enough. A new sound shattered the moment. Movement outside. Quick, precise, dangerous. Alexander's body tensed. Guns, shadows, strategy. It all returned instantly. The calm mask fell back into place. Every inch of him screamed lethal, calculated, unstoppable. I wanted to run. I wanted to hide. But I didn't. Not fully. Because somewhere, even in fear, I trusted him. I had to. He had saved my life once, and I knew he would do it again, no matter the cost. The night stretched on. The danger was far from over, but the bond between us had shifted. Fear had mixed with fascination, confusion with trust. I realized something terrifying. Surviving. Alexander Knox wasn't just about avoiding harm. It was about surrendering to the world he ruled, a world of power, danger, and impossible attraction. And I was ready to step deeper, even if I didn't fully understand what that meant. Because in his world, love wasn't gentle. But survival could be deadly beautiful. The night returned with a vengeance. Footsteps. Soft, calculated, crawling along the outer perimeter of the mansion. I could hear them now. Not distant anymore. Close. Too close. My pulse shot through my chest, faster than ever. I froze, every nerve on edge. Alexander moved first. His body shifted, coiled, lethal. One step forward, and it was like the shadows themselves obeyed him. Every guard, every weapon, every hidden camera seemed to bend to his command. But now, I could see it in him, something I hadn't seen before. Vulnerability. Not fear, not hesitation, but the weight of responsibility. A man who could destroy the world, yet was haunted by the thought of losing me. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything. But my voice failed. I could only watch him. My husband, though he didn't feel like one, not yet, was a storm contained in human form. And I was standing in the eye. "They're here," he said, low, almost a whisper. Not to me, not for me, for himself, for the predator in him to acknowledge the threat. The first intruder came from the shadows, moving too fast, too silent. I barely had time to see him before Alexander was there. One move, a flick of his hand, and the man went down, unconscious, but alive. Another came, and Alexander met him mid-step, twisting, flipping, throwing him into the wall with a precision that made me shiver. I realized something terrifying. I was witnessing not just a fight, but a display of absolute control, absolute power, and I was completely exposed. My heart hammered, fear and adrenaline crashing in waves. "Alexander, what do I do?" I whispered, almost too softly to be heard. He glanced at me, eyes dark, unreadable, but the faintest hint of something, care, concern, maybe even pride, flashed across his face. "Stay behind me. Watch, learn, survive." His words weren't comforting. They were orders. But I obeyed anyway. I had no choice. And I realized that in this world, that obedience wasn't weakness. It was survival. The fight escalated. Men stormed in, shadows moving faster than I could track. Alexander met. Every strike, every attempt, every angle. And yet, somehow, he also kept me in sight. Always. Aware I was there, protected. One man slipped past. Just for a second. He lunged toward me. My scream tore out raw and sharp. Alexander moved before I even registered the movement. One step, one shift, and the attacker was slammed into the floor, incapacitated. He turned to me then, the storm fading for a moment. His chest heaved slightly. The first time I'd seen him like that. Not calm, not calculated, but alive. Vulnerable. Exhausted. Human. "You're impossible," he said, voice low, gravelly, almost a confession. "You shouldn't be here. And yet you are." I realized then that I wasn't just terrified of the world. I wasn't just terrified of him. I was terrified of the pull he had over me. The way fear and fascination twisted together until I didn't know where one ended and the other began. The intruders were down. The mansion was silent again, but nothing felt peaceful. Not the shadows, not the walls, not even Alexander. He looked at me, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might speak softly, let me feel the bond we'd formed through chaos. But he didn't. His hand reached for mine, not in affection, not in tenderness, but in grounding, a reminder that survival came first. Always. And I realized the truth I hadn't accepted yet. Loving him, trusting him, being drawn to him. None of it would be gentle. None of it would be safe. But in a world this dangerous, it was the only way to survive. I squeezed his hand back, trembling, and in that simple act, I knew something had shifted. Not love. Not yet, but something dangerously close. Something that would change everything. The night was electric. Every shadow felt alive, every sound amplified. I could hear the faintest footstep, the rustle of clothing, the whisper of movement outside. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. And through it all, Alexander was a storm contained in human form. He moved silently, eyes scanning, hands poised on guns, knives, and every weapon in the room. I stayed behind him, breathing shallow, clutching his coat, trying not to make a sound. But I wasn't invisible. He knew I was there. He had to. And somehow, in that knowledge, I felt protected. "Stay close," he muttered, voice low, dangerous. Not a command, not a warning, just fact. Then it happened. A window shattered. Glass exploded across the floor. Shadows moved faster than I could track. And then I saw them. Men in black, armed, trained, relentless. The final wave. The attack we had been waiting for. Alexander didn't flinch. Not once. Every move precise. Every strike lethal. He moved like he owned the world, but his eyes betrayed him, just slightly, for a fraction of a second. Concern. Anxiety. A calculation I couldn't see but could feel. One intruder lunged toward me. My scream tore out before I even thought. Alexander's hand shot out, grabbing me, pulling me behind him in a fluid motion that left me pressed against his chest. Heart racing. I realized I could feel his pulse. Strong. Steady. Controlled. Human. Another man charged. Alexander met him mid-step, spinning, throwing him against a wall. The force rattled the mansion. I stumbled, caught by him, and felt the tension radiating off his body, pure, unrelenting focus, but also something else. Fear, worry, for me. I realized then something terrifying. I had become part of this world, part of his life, inseparable from the danger he carried. And for the first time, I didn't want to step away. "Scarlet," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "Watch me, learn, survive." I nodded, terrified and exhilarated. My hands shook, but my mind sharpened. I noticed his patterns, his movements, the way he controlled the battlefield. And somewhere deep inside, spark ignited, a courage I hadn't known I had. Another attacker fell, then another. Alexander moved with lethal elegance, and yet each strike left a mark on him too. Sweat on his brow, tension in his jaw, a slight flinch I had never seen. Vulnerability hiding beneath the mask of perfection. The final intruder reached for me again, faster than I could react. But this time, I acted. A step forward, a push, a scream that startled him. Alexander's eyes snapped to mine, sharp, questioning, alive. And then together, in perfect coordination born of chaos and necessity, we turned the tide. The attacker went down. Silence returned. Heavy, suffocating, final. My chest heaved. I was alive. We were alive. Alexander finally looked at me. His eyes softened, just slightly. But it was enough. Enough to feel the bond forged in fear, in danger, in survival. Not love. Not yet. But something dangerously close. "You're alive," he said, voice low, rough. "And you? You stayed." I nodded, trembling. My words failed, but I didn't need them. The mansion, the night, the danger. It had tested us, broken us, and somehow drawn us together. Fear, power, fascination, survival, all wrapped into one. And I realized for the first time that surviving Alexander Knox didn't mean avoiding him, it meant trusting him. And somehow, impossibly, I did. The mansion was quiet now. The echoes of the battle lingered like a ghost, faint but impossible to ignore. Broken glass, scuffed floors, and a lingering scent of smoke reminded me that survival wasn't luck. It was a choice, and we had made it through. I sat on the edge of the grand staircase, hands clasped tightly, still trembling. My chest ached, from fear and adrenaline. But beneath that, a strange sense of clarity settled in. I had seen Alexander Knox in his element, witnessed the full force of his power and precision. I had seen his vulnerability, too. A fleeting glimpse, almost hidden beneath the storm, but there. And it had shaken me in ways I hadn't expected. He walked toward me slowly, the mansion's shadows stretching behind him. Every step, measured, controlled, deliberate. But now there was no immediate danger pressing him forward. No attackers waiting, just him and me. "You're awake," he said, low, voice still carrying the weight of command but softer, almost cautious. I am," I whispered, unsure why my voice trembled. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps relief. Or perhaps something else, something I wasn't ready to name. He knelt beside me, just close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You were reckless," he said, though not sharply, more like a statement than a scolding. "In a world like this, recklessness gets people killed. I had to do something," I admitted, voice shaking. I couldn't just stand there. His gaze held mine, dark, unreadable, but intense. "No one expected you to. But you need to understand, danger is not just out there," he said, gesturing to the silent halls of the mansion. "It's in every choice, every glance, every misstep. Survival, it's more than living. It's knowing when to act and when to trust someone stronger than yourself." I swallowed, understanding sinking in. He was right. I hadn't just survived because of my own instincts. I had survived because he had chosen to protect me. Every movement, every decision he had made during the attack, it wasn't just skill. It was calculated, precise, and deadly. And all for me. A strange warmth spread through me. Not comfort, not love, but something close enough that it made my chest tighten. I realized, with a mixture of fear and fascination, that I had come to rely on him, trust him, even admire him. Something dangerous, something I couldn't yet name, but powerful. He reached out and lightly brushed a strand of hair from my face, careful, precise. Not tenderness, exactly, but intent, focus, awareness. I felt my pulse spike, my body reacting to the faintest touch. "You're stronger than I thought," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Stronger than I expected." I wanted to argue, to protest that I wasn't ready, that I wasn't equipped, that I wasn't enough. But his gaze held me, unyielding, magnetic, and I couldn't. I could only nod, breath catching, realizing that my definition of strength was changing. That surviving Alexander Knox wasn't about avoiding him. It was about stepping into the storm with him. The mansion was calm now, but I knew it was only temporary. Danger would always return. Threats would never fully disappear. And yet, for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I was alive. I had survived. And somehow, I had begun to understand the man I had. Married, not for love, not yet, but for fate, survival, and something dangerously magnetic that pulled us together. And I realized something else, terrifying and thrilling. In this world, there was no safety. Only trust, danger, and the dark thrill of surviving with Alexander Knox. The mansion had finally fallen into a quiet that wasn't haunted by immediate danger. Only the echoes of the night's chaos lingered in the walls, faint reminders of what had passed and what might return. I walked slowly through the grand hallway, feeling the weight of everything we had survived pressing into me. Each step made me more aware, not just of the danger around me, but of the strange, undeniable pull Alexander held over my life. He followed silently, a few paces behind. I didn't look back, but I felt him, always present, always there, like gravity. There was no threat now, yet the tension hadn't entirely left the air. It was subtle, dangerous, alive. A pulse I could sense in the walls, the shadows, and in him. I stopped at the large windows overlooking the city, the nightlights shimmering like distant stars. I inhaled slowly, trying to process everything. The attacks, his protection, the truth about my sister and the storm that had become our life. "You've changed," he said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. Not a statement, not a threat. Observation. I turned to him surprised. "I have?" He nodded once, dark eyes unwavering. "You're not the same girl who came into this mansion. You've seen it all. You've survived. And somehow, you've adapted." I felt a strange sense of pride mixed with fear. Adapted. That word carried weight. It wasn't just about surviving danger. It was about accepting it, about understanding it, about learning how to exist in his world. And I realized I had done just that. He stepped closer, and for the first time since we had been married, the calculated walls around him seemed to soften just a fraction. Not completely, but enough that I could feel it. The faintest vulnerability beneath the surface. "You trust me," he said, almost as a question, though his tone didn't waver. I hesitated. My chest tightened. I have to," I admitted, "because if I don't, I won't survive." He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. "Good," he said, voice low. "Dangerous, yet carrying something unspoken. Because in my world, trust is everything, and right now, you're the only one I trust." The words sent a shiver through me. Not fear, not love, not yet. Something darker. Something magnetic. Something I couldn't quite name. My pulse spiked, and I realized the dangerous bond forming between us, one forged in survival, blood, fear, and the faintest glimmer of something resembling care. I took a cautious step closer. "And you trust me to survive with you?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face with careful precision. Not tenderness, exactly, but awareness, presence, focus. Finally, he said, "I don't have a choice." I stared at him, realizing the truth behind the words. He had chosen to protect me not for love, not for desire, but because he couldn't allow me to be lost. And somehow, in that brutal, merciless, controlled way, it felt like the first thread of something dangerously intimate forming between us. The city lights flickered behind us, shadows dancing across the walls. And in that quiet, filled, with the remnants of chaos and danger, I understood something profound. Surviving Alexander Knox wasn't just about avoiding harm. It was about stepping into the storm, standing beside him, and letting the danger and the attraction pull you in, even when it terrified you. I reached out lightly, letting my hand brush against his, not in surrender, not in softness, but in acknowledgement, connection, trust, understanding. And for the first time, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, I realized something thrilling and terrifying. This world of danger, power, and survival wasn't just his, it was ours. The mansion was silent. For the first time since I'd arrived in Alexander Knox's world, the chaos had passed. The danger wasn't gone, it never would be. But for a moment, the storm had lifted. I could finally breathe, finally feel the weight of survival and the strange, intoxicating bond that had grown between us. Alexander stood near the fireplace, dark silhouette against the flickering flames. He was calm, controlled, and yet I could see it now. The walls around him, the armor he wore so flawlessly, were cracked just slightly. A hint of vulnerability, a glimpse of the man beneath the danger and power. I stepped closer, letting the quiet stretch between us. Not tense, not fearful, just present, alive. "You survived," he said quietly, not as a statement, but as an acknowledgement of everything we'd endured. "You didn't just survive the attacks. You survived me." I blinked. A strange, dangerous thrill coursed through me. I did, and I learned, I admitted. Not just about survival, but about you. About this world. About what it means to trust, to step into danger and not turn away. He didn't smile. Not fully. But there was a flicker, something raw, almost human in his eyes. "Trust isn't easy in my world," he said. "It's survival. And you've earned it." I reached for his hand. Not timidly, not as a plea, but deliberately, firmly, as a promise. A recognition. The bond we had forged through fire, blood, and fear was solid, dangerous, magnetic, real. He let me take his hand, his thumb brushing my knuckles, deliberate, careful. And in that single, quiet moment, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. I wasn't just his wife by arrangement. I wasn't just his responsibility. I was part of him, part of his world. And somehow, impossibly, he had become part of mine. The fire crackled behind us, shadows dancing across the walls. The danger still lingered, outside, beyond the mansion's walls. But inside, for the first time, there was calm. Not softness, not ease, but a fragile, thrilling equilibrium between fear, fascination, and the undeniable pull between us. "You'll never be safe," he said quietly, voice low, a statement and a warning all at once. "I don't want safe," I whispered. "Not with you. Not after everything we've survived. Not after seeing this." His eyes darkened, unreadable, and yet I saw it. The momentary slip of emotion, the faintest flicker of something beyond control. Something dangerous. Something real. "You're reckless," he said. "I learned from the best," I shot back, my lips twitching with a mix of defiance and exhilaration. He didn't laugh. Not entirely. But the corner of his mouth lifted ever so slightly. The tension between us shifted, but it didn't vanish. The storm hadn't ended. It had simply become ours to navigate. Together. I realized then that surviving Alexander Knox wasn't about escaping him. It wasn't about fear or hatred, or even control. It was about surrendering to the storm, stepping into it willingly, and letting the danger and the dark thrill of power, protection, and obsession draw you in. I squeezed his hand, and in that small gesture, I knew everything had changed. The battles, the danger, the fear, it had all led to this. Not safety, not love as anyone else might understand it, but connection, survival, and something dangerously intoxicating. Trust. Alexander Knox stepped closer, and I met him, not with fear, but with awareness, defiance, and something else, anticipation. The mansion might be quiet now. The world might still be dangerous. But we had survived, together. And in that survival, in that chaos and power, we had found something undeniable, something dark, something real, something ours. And for the first time, I knew this world, Alexander's world, was mine too. And that's how the storm unfolded. How Alexander Knox and I survived the chaos, danger, and impossible twists of fate. If you felt the tension, the fear, and the pull of this dark, dangerous love story, if you were drawn into every heartbeat, every choice, every secret, then don't let the story end here. Subscribe now and join me as we dive deeper into worlds filled with power, passion, and danger. Turn on notifications so you never miss a moment where love, survival, and death